All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling something that's been making a lot of noise in Canadian higher education lately, and that's diversifying the international student population. Specifically, we're looking at all the fallout from this call by Canada's Immigration Minister for universities to think outside the box when it comes to recruitment, basically to look beyond their usual pool of Indian students.
Yeah, it's quite the challenge, isn't it? It's not just about getting students from different countries. It's this whole web of like systemic issues we've got to untangle. And making sure it's welcoming for, well, everyone.
For sure. So our main source for this deep dive is a piece from the Pi News. The title is, get this, Fix the System. Canada reacts to minister's diversification call. And I think it kind of sums up that tension perfectly. Like the minister wants more diversity, obviously. But then so many folks are saying the system itself is like a roadblock to actually getting there.
Yeah, I see that.
So yeah, get ready for some stats that might surprise you and a bit of a peek behind the curtain of like how all this actually works. By the end, you'll have a much clearer picture of what's at stake here, for sure.
Yeah, and maybe even some ideas about how Canada can solve this puzzle.
Exactly. Okay, so to set the stage, the article quotes Immigration Minister Marc Miller, and he says, I would say universities and colleges have been going to one or two source countries and constantly going back to the well on that, and we expect the diversity of students. Now, it's worth pointing out, he did say Indian students are valuable, but even so, those words really got people fired up.
It's funny, isn't it? It's that going back to the well bit that seems to have rubbed everyone the wrong way. Kind of makes it sound like focusing on India is, I don't know, lazy or like out of touch. And that's where all this backlash comes in.
Oh yeah, big time. The article highlights some like really strong voices pushing back against that. Isaac Garcia-Sitten, for example, he's from Toronto Metropolitan University, and he says straight up, we can't talk about diversification without fixing the system that processes these students.
Right, and that's the thing. He's not some lone voice in the wilderness here. You talk to folks in academia, and a lot of them feel like they're being told to diversify without the actual means to do it.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. What are we talking about when we say the system needs fixing?
Well, the article lays out a few key things. First, you've got these long processing times for student visas, and that really hits certain regions harder than others. Then there's the whole issue of high refusal rates, again, depending on what country you're from. But honestly, I think the worst part is just how often immigration policies change. It's like, how can universities plan long-term recruitment when the goalposts keep moving?
Right, like trying to hit a moving target. How do you build a solid strategy when the rules are constantly in flux?
Exactly. That unpredictability just throws a wrench in the whole thing.
To really get a sense of the scale of this, let's look at some numbers. The article says in 2023, Indian students made up roughly 41% of Canada's total international student population. 41%. The next biggest group was China at like 10%.
Wow. Yeah. You can definitely see why the minister felt the need to shake things up a bit. Though, to be fair, there have been attempts to diversify. It's not like nobody's trying. In recent years, there's been more focus on Africa and Southeast Asia.
Right, but there's a catch, isn't there? Aren't those the exact regions facing those visa delays and higher refusal rates we were just talking about?
Sadly, yes. The article quotes Vinitha Gangatharan from York University, and she kind of sums it up. One step forward, two steps back.
Ugh, so frustrating. So it seems like the minister's call, even with good intentions, kind of backfired. Now there's this feeling that Indian students are being like scapegoated for a problem that isn't really their fault. To understand why that's such a sensitive issue, we got to zoom out a bit, get some historical context in here.
Definitely. So rewind back to like the first Trump presidency. Canada saw this huge surge in international students because, well, the U.S. wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. People called it the Trump bump.
All right. And now I guess with this whole diversification thing, it kind of makes Canada look like the backup choice.
Yeah, exactly. And that's got to sting a bit. Garcia-Sitten brings up another point, which is the potential damage to Canada's reputation in the long run. If the country is seen as unreliable or, I don't know, hostile towards certain student groups, that could have consequences down the line.
Especially if the U.S. ever, like, course corrects, right? Students could just flock back south and leave Canada high and dry.
Exactly. It's bigger as just an academic debate. We're talking about Canada's economy, its future, its whole place on the global stage.
Big picture stuff. Okay, so we've got this controversy, universities pushing back in Canada, maybe on shaky ground in this global competition for students. But what's the government's response to all of this? The article mentions they didn't really answer the diversification question directly.
That's right. When they reached out for comment, the IRCC, that's Canada's immigration body, they mainly talked about how The high number of immigrants is putting a strain on things, housing, infrastructure, social services, that kind of thing. But nothing concrete about diversifying the student population itself.
Interesting. So they see the challenges, but maybe not specifically those tied to student diversity. Makes you wonder if there's like a disconnect between the government's overall goals and what universities are actually dealing with on the ground.
Maybe, maybe. Or they've got a plan, but they're just not showing their cards yet.
Good point. All right, so things are messy, that's for sure. We've got the minister's call, the pushback, the potential for Canada's reputation to take a hit, and the government's kind of vague response. But before we get into what could be done, I want to pause here and ask you this. If you were advising the government, what's one concrete thing they could do to encourage diversification and still make sure all international students feel welcome? It's a tough one, but I think it's worth thinking about.
Absolutely. A lot to unpack there.
So we've laid out this challenge, right? Diversifying, but not like pushing away India and doing it all within a system that's, well, a little clunky. But what do we do about it? Like, what would actual action look like? Concrete steps.
Okay, so if I was advising the government, first thing I'd say is you got to hit this from multiple angles, tackle those systemic problems, and be really careful about the message you're sending when it comes to recruiting. Two birds, one stone kind of thing.
Okay, two tracks. I like it. Lay it on me. What does tackling the system actually involve?
Well, those visa processing times, right, they're a huge roadblock, especially for like Africa, Southeast Asia. Just streamlining that process would be huge. Maybe more resources, digitizing stuff, anything to send the signal that Canada's serious about welcoming students from those regions.
Yeah, less of a bureaucratic nightmare, I get it. But it's more than just speed, right? We talked about those constant policy shifts earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Consistency is key. Like, if universities can't even predict what the visa rules will be in a year or two, it's impossible to build those lasting relationships for recruitment. The government's got to be transparent, predictable, if they want this to work.
So track one, make the system itself lessen a headache. Makes sense. But what about track two, the messaging? How do we fix this idea that Canada's like turning its back on Indian students?
This is where it gets tricky, right? I think instead of saying we need to shift away from India, we should be talking about how to expand opportunities for everyone. Less about closing a door, more about making the circle bigger.
I like that. It's more inclusive, less tension.
Exactly. And to really drive that home, showcase those success stories of Indian students in Canada. Highlight what they've achieved, how they've contributed. They're a big part of why Canadian universities are what they are.
Real people, real impact. Yeah, that's powerful stuff.
For sure. Humanizes the whole thing, reminds everyone, this is good for all Canadians, attracting global talent.
Okay, but we can't just ignore the elephant in the room, right? That strain on housing, infrastructure, the IRCC mentioned it too. How do we welcome more students when those are already real problems?
You're hitting on something really important. It's bigger than just international students, though. Canada as a whole needs to be way more proactive about affordable housing, expanding infrastructure, just to keep up with the population growth, period.
So it's not just about making things comfy for newcomers. It's about making sure things work for everyone already here.
Right. And that ties into that economic argument, too. International students, they're not just using resources, they're bringing them in. Revenue, jobs, starting businesses, enriching our communities. It's an investment, but it's got to be done smart.
Sustainable growth, not just opening the floodgates and hoping for the best.
Exactly.
So it seems like the bottom line is, if Canada really wants to be that welcoming, competitive destination, it needs to put its money where its mouth is, build a system that can support that vision.
You got it? Actions speak louder than words. And it's not just on the government either. Universities got to step up, build those international partnerships, make their campuses inclusive, advocate for policies that support diversity, the whole 9 yards.
It's a team effort, for sure. Okay, but let's play devil's advocate for a sec. What if Canada just, I don't know, doesn't get this right? What's the worst case scenario?
Ooh, okay, imagine this. Classrooms, less dynamic, less stimulating, those debates we talked about, gone. Canadian universities start sliding down those global rankings. They lose their edge in research, innovation, and all those economic benefits. Oof.
Yikes. Fewer students, less money for universities, less talent for businesses. That's a hit to the economy for sure.
Exactly. And globally, Canada's reputation takes a hit. It's not that haven anymore, not seen as welcoming, diverse, stable. Other countries see the opening, right? They sweep in, better visa processes, clearer policies, cheaper education.
So Canada becomes irrelevant.
I would say irrelevant, but definitely less competitive. And that's the real tragedy, because it's not just about numbers. It's about losing those unique perspectives, those different ways of thinking, that energy that international students bring.
We're losing a part of what makes Canada, well, Canada.
You could say that. Losing that global edge, that connection to something bigger.
High stakes, huh?
For sure. But hey, let's not end on a downer. There's still time. Canada can course correct, embrace that vision of being a truly global nation.
Okay, so let's shift gears. What does success look like? Paint me a picture.
All right, get ready for some vivid imagery. Campuses bustling, students from everywhere sharing ideas, collaborating on research, learning about each other's cultures, lively debates, cutting-edge labs, communities enriched by all those experiences.
That energy, that cross-pollination of ideas, that's what makes Canada special.
Exactly. And those businesses thriving with a diverse workforce, fresh perspectives, innovative solutions, startups with global dreams, research teams pushing boundaries, a cultural scene that's constantly evolving.
So it's more than just the economy, right? It's about creating a society that's open, inclusive, ready for whatever the world throws at us.
You got it. That's a Canada I think we can all get behind.
Okay, so we've seen the potential pitfalls. We've seen what we could achieve. What are the key takeaways here? What do you want folks listening to really remember?
This isn't just about fiddling with a few policies. This is about how Canada sees itself in the world.
Diversity isn't just like a bonus. It's crucial for Canada's success.
Right. And it takes all of us. Government leadership, universities stepping up, Canadians embracing diversity and inclusion.
Shaping the kind of country we want to live in.
Beautifully said.
Right, we've covered a lot today. That controversial statement, the potential for things to go south, and that vision of a truly global Canada. But before we go, remember that question from earlier. If you were advising the government, what's that one concrete step they could take? Diversification and making everyone feel welcome. Keep that in mind as we go forward.
A question worth thinking about. The answers we come up with today, they shape the Canada of tomorrow.
Okay, so we've talked about the good, the bad, the ugly, if Canada does or doesn't nail this whole diversification thing, but let's zoom out even further. Remember Garcia Sitton saying that if both North American countries seem unstable, students might just say, forget it, and look elsewhere entirely.
Oh yeah, he's got a point there. It's easy to get caught up in the U.S.-Canada back and forth, but the world's a big place. Australia, the UK, even some up-and-coming economies are getting in on this global talent game.
Yeah, you see those ads, right? Fancy campuses, promises of easy visas, scholarships for specific fields. They're definitely trying to lure those bright minds away.
For sure. It's like, imagine a restaurant, right? Great reputation, but the service is slow, the menu's stale, and suddenly there are all these new places popping up across the street, looking way more appealing.
Oof, yeah, that's not a good look. So the competition's heating up, that's clear, but what does that actually mean for Canada? What happens if those students do start going elsewhere?
Well, obviously there's the economic hit we talked about. Less tuition money, fewer skilled workers for businesses. But it's more than that. It's this intangible loss. Remember those classrooms we were picturing? The diverse viewpoints, challenging assumptions, pushing boundaries. What if that just fades away?
Like a garden losing its variety, right? You might still have some pretty flowers, but the whole ecosystem is weaker.
Exactly. And think about Canadian cities.
Yeah, those melting pots of cultures, always innovating.
What if they lose that international spark? Fewer new restaurants with global cuisine, fewer startups with diverse founders, fewer cultural events.
Like dimming the lights, right? The potential's there, but it's not as bright anymore.
It's a loss for everyone, for Canadians, for the world.
Okay, so the stakes are high, we get it, but I want to end on a hopeful note, even with all this competition, these potential consequences. If Canada steps up, truly embraces diversity and inclusion, what does that future look like?
All right, let's get optimistic. Imagine Canadian universities, not just places to learn, but global hubs of collaboration. Researchers from all over tackling those big challenges together.
Medical breakthroughs, climate change solutions, new technologies, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And Canadian businesses, not just competing globally, but leading, because they've got diverse teams, fresh perspectives, innovative ideas.
At the forefront of renewable energy, AI, social change.
You got it. And beyond that, communities that are even more vibrant, interconnected. Everyone feels welcomed, valued. Cultural exchange is just like part of everyday life.
Canada's not just in the world, it's truly a part of the world, leading by example.
Beautifully put. That's something to strive for.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's remember this isn't just about policies or recruitment. It's about who we are as a country, what we believe in, the legacy we leave behind.
It's about making choices that reflect our values. Investing in a future where diversity isn't just a goal, it's what makes Canada thrive.
And that's a conversation we need to keep having with ourselves, with our communities. So keep asking those tough questions, challenge those assumptions. Let's work together to build a Canada that reflects the best of humanity.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Until then, keep exploring.